Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September 30th episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we try to shine a spotlight on stories that impact local grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross. I'm the founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host, Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing today on this International Podcast Day?
I didn't know it was International Podcast Day. I'm doing all right. I having some computer trouble, so I guess that's not great. But other than that, hanging in there.
Yeah, we'll see how things go. Hopefully, we've fixed all the technical glitches and we'll be able to have smooth sailing the rest of the way. But in terms of International Podcast Day, yeah, I was today years old when I found that out. I just saw some references to it on social media today. Never even verified to make sure it's actually today, or maybe it was yesterday or something else. But I just thought I'd throw that out there because I had never heard of it before. But apparently, if I go by what I read, today is International Podcast Day.
Well, that's cool, I guess. Not sure we needed a holiday, but I'll take it.
Right.
Tell Gabby she's got to get me a gift.
Yeah. Is there, well, I mean, and any big news going on? I imagine it's Tuesday when we record, so we had Champions League today. Your team, Tottenham, was playing.
Yeah, they got a point. It was a dog shit game, though. They did not play well. But I'll take it. You know, that's how you do it. Win at home, get the point on the road. So,
yeah, I watched it, and obviously, I am not a Spurs fan, so I was definitely cheering for Bodo Glimt there. Would be nice to see as a team that's not historically
much not
the first time ever, right?
Within the last 5 years, they've become really the top dog in Norway. It's actually been like a meteoric rise. They would be a fun club to talk about sometime. Maybe not as a full bit, but yeah, they're super.
Yeah, we
against
might have to
anyone else. I would be rooting for 100%, like anybody else. They actually, not to dive too deep in on it, but one of their players, I don't remember his first name, but his last name is Berg. His father and his grandfather played for Bodo Glimt, and there's a statue outside the stadium of his grandfather and father next to each other, and he's the captain, the grandson. So you got to think they're going to get a third statue there, hopefully.
Yeah, probably. I was not aware of that. That's a cool little story. Maybe that's something we should dig into a little bit on another podcast down the road.
They're not the northernmost club in the top flight of Norway, however. Anyway, we can talk about that some other time.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, tonight we are going to do a little bit of a dive into the 2026 Concacaf Champions Cup, specifically how teams qualify for the Concacaf Champions Cup, and mostly for us here in San Diego, because it's a very real possibility that there could be some Champions Cup matches in San Diego next year. Now, it's going to depend on how SDFC does over the next few weeks, I guess, as they close out their season. But we thought we'd take a dive in there to see what it takes to qualify, who's already qualified, because we have quite a few teams qualify, and look at some of the qualification processes in the different zones. And specifically, because we've got second leg matches happening all this week, look at the Central American zone as well. So we'll get into that in a few minutes here. But first, as always, we will hit some of our cup news, some lower league news, we'll hit some current events. But to kick things off, we had our first call to action in a while last week. And we told you about the link to the Blizzard doing their tournament for, I don't know if they call it the greatest goals or best goals or legendary goals or something along those lines, where they started with 64 groups of 4 in the first round, where you just a Google form, you could go in and vote. There were links to all the different goals, so you could see them if you were not aware. And then we're now into the second round, where they're down to 64 teams, so 16 groups of 4. And I did not actually go back and finish filling out my round 1 after making a big deal about it and sending that out. I did part of it, but then I got busy and I missed the cutoff. But I did do this second round. I went through and did all of those. But one of the things we talked about, and I don't remember, you'll have to help remind me whether we talked about it in the episode or after we had finished the episode, is about the two of us coming up with some of our list of favorite goals by whatever criteria, we individually deemed appropriate for that. So I figured we'd kick off the episode with that. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Dylan. Did you come up with any goals? Some goals to look at and talk about?
Maybe not on the list, but I kind of knew right away what one of my all-time favorite goals was. Here, I actually did pull it up though. Sorry, I thought I did. Here, I can find. Oh shoot, that's such a grainy video. I guess I should have watched it first. Yeah, I'm gonna find the video, but it's actually not even really the goal so much as the pass is like just genuinely the best pass I've ever seen. Like God, I gotta find the video. But yeah, so I maybe it's on the list. I don't know. But
so give a little description of what it is.
Yeah, so it's sorry, I'm just trying to see if I can find it. But it's so Christian Eriksen back in his Spurs days in the FA Cup semifinal game. Spurs would actually go on to lose 4-2, but to equalize the game at 2, Eriksen puts in this pass from about, I don't know, maybe he's probably about 50 yards from goal, but it's just the way he's in the right channel and curls the ball into the 12 yards out from goal in the left channel, so across the channels. Right here, I did find a good video of it, so I'll pop that in our private chat here. I apologize, the original video I had was super grainy, but it's one of those passes where you audibly you can't help but kind of laugh to yourself because it's like, wow, what a fucking pass. Excuse my language. But so it's those kind of things that are always going to be my favorites, just the pure beauty, invention, things like that.
All right. So let's see if I can. Oh, forgot because I had to restart. I don't have my stuff.
Wait, here, I can try and share it real quick.
That's all right. I talk about our technical difficulties here.
Yeah, right.
There we go. I don't know if we'll have audio coming through on it because I didn't get a chance to double check this before we get started. But do you want to do it with audio or without? If we have,
if you can do audio, I don't know that the call is super notable or anything though.
Okay, so let's go ahead and play it and see what happens.
Oh, there you go. I got audio. So there's Eriksen on the ball.
Fair-minded Argentinian way, get the better of Conte's defense. Oh, it has!
It's just genuinely one of the best passes I've ever seen.
Equalize.
And of course, like I said, they didn't go on to win the game, so I guess you could maybe make the argument that it shouldn't be. That doesn't really matter for me though. Some of my all-time favorite goals came in games that the team didn't win. So that's one that jumped out to me immediately when we were talking about this last week.
Right, and what I found when I was going through it is, how do you quantify what the best goal is or your favorite goal? I decided to go with my favorite goals.
Yeah, I don't think there's another way to answer that question, to be honest.
Yeah, and one that I did 5, and I'll describe them quickly because most of them people probably know. The last one I might do to show as a link just in case people haven't seen it or even to hear the commentary. But I found that as I was going through and eliminating, just coming up things, one of the first goals I always think of is Roberto Carlos's free kick, Brazil against France, early 2000s, I think it is. But little, international tournament, just invitational thing. But that free kick from 40 yards out, left-footed shot that bends back towards the goal, which I always think technique-wise and everything is just an absolute amazing goal. But that wasn't one of my 5. it's a goal I always think of that I absolutely appreciate. But when I was going through the list, what I found, like for me, they were game winners and mostly, not always, and things that had an impact because I watched it. I watched it and it had an impact on me. So I'll go through just the 5. I narrowed it down. It was tough narrowing it down to 5, but my 5 kind of span my life a little bit. So the very first one, and it is not a great goal. Like no one would say, oh, that's one of the prettiest goals I've ever seen. But 1982 Men's World Cup semifinal, West Germany versus France, classic game. And West Germany, well, France goes up in added time. So it's 1-1 at the end of regulation. France goes up 3-1 in extra time. And then Germany comes back to tie it up. So it's that last goal by Germany, by Klaus Fischer. So that just, and for me, it was the first time. So I was just finished my freshman year of high school. I don't know if it was a summer day or a weekend day, but we were over at a friend's house, a bunch of us, and there were people who were a few years older than me. And then, my younger sibling was there as well, but there was probably a dozen of us there watching this game, and we'd kind of split up evenly on sides and who we were picking to win. We all played soccer. It was the first time, it's the first World Cup I remember really watching multiple games on television. And that one was just a classic. And then when West Germany ties it up, I don't remember if it was the 120th minute, but I mean, it was getting towards the end, looking like France was going to win, but then sent to penalty kicks and West Germany wins on penalty kicks. But that was for me, my first big memorable goal. It wasn't a live event I'm watching on television, but with everybody in the room, I remember we had scarves. No one really had scarves at that time, not where I was growing up, watching teams, but we had been swimming and we came in to watch it and we all had beach towels and everybody's jumping up and down sofas and whipping beach towels around. So this one was, had strong visceral memories for me as a goal. But I even went back again to go watch it and look and see if I wanted to do a clip. And it's really, again, not a terribly amazing goal. But I went back and watching the highlights of the game. You watch like a 12-minute highlight, and I forget until I watch the clips again how brutal the game was in the 70s and into the early 80s before they started cracking down on some things. Like there are things that happened in the game that didn't get called or maybe got a foul that would be red cards today, clearly. I mean, but the game has changed so much for the better, I think, because it allows your good players to play. But that was my first kind of big one. And then 98 World Cup, Dennis Bergkamp, his 90th minute game winner against Argentina in the quarterfinals. That, to me, again, one that I remember watching with people and just the skill of taking, and I can't remember who played the ball in, but it was beautiful pass in, and then Bergkamp plays it, one touch in the air volley, but across his body to then set himself up to curl it into the far post. Frequently that goal is on those lists of all-time greatest goals or greatest World Cup goals. So it's one that's pretty easy to find. But that again was one I remember watching it and being with a group of people watching it that stood out. And always loved Dennis Bergkamp as a player. Phenomenal skill, especially in tight spaces. Then one of the few that is probably, again, a classic goal for people was the 2002 Champions League final where Zidane hit the volley from the top of the box. But it was one of those, again, I think probably one of my first big pub matches with lots of people watching a final. And I was a neutral, but just to see that whole thing set up with Zidane at the top of the box, you see the pass coming in, he's totally unmarked, but it's like slow motion. You can see what he's setting up to do, and then he just rips it into the top corner. It was just, phenomenal skill for that one. My fourth one was Landon Donovan's goal in 2010 World Cup. against Algeria. Again, like as I was coming through, it's just all those things that have been impactful to me.
Sure.
But my single all-time favorite, and I can't say it's just a goal, it's the whole build-up to the whole thing. And I'm doing this chronologically, but it just happens that my last one is my favorite one here. It's from you've probably seen this, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that haven't, unless they're into some lower league soccer. But 2013 EFL Championship playoffs, Watford versus Leicester City.
Oh yeah,
they're playing
that's a good one.
in Watford. Yeah, and it's I have it. So let me see if I have it actually.
There will be non-soccer fans who have seen this goal. This is like this broke through the zeitgeist.
Yes.
Into the general sports realm, I think.
So I'm gonna put it up here. We'll do about a minute of it. So on audio, people will listen to it, but if you have a chance, Troy Deeney is the one who scores. You can look up any combination of probably 2013 and Troy Deeney and Watford, and you're gonna get it.
Yeah.
But we'll play it in just a second, but the setup is crazy. They're going into added time. It's 2-2 on aggregate. Leicester City is going to win a penalty in the penalty box that, by most people's accounts watching it, it was incredibly soft and shouldn't have been called. And in the age of VAR, probably would have been overruled.
Well, and also, I think this was still when they used away goals as a tiebreaker. So I think this goal would not only put them ahead on aggregate, but would really mean that Watford would then have to score 2 to turn the tie around, if I'm remembering.
Yeah, God, I don't even remember that.
I think that was part of it as well.
So the penalty gets awarded. I'm going to give it away, but then people can watch it or listen to it. But Leicester, the player taking the penalty, the goalkeeper saves the first one. The rebound comes right back to the kicker. The goalkeeper saves the second one. Watford clears it, and very similar in a sense to the Landon Donovan goal in the World Cup. Watford brings it out up the right-hand side. They play it across the box. Person on the far post who heads it back to Troy Deeney. Hogg was the player, heads it to Troy Deeney, who volleys it right into the goal, and everything's just pandemonium. But for me, it is like, this is soccer, right? This is the craziness of this sport, all encapsulated, the heartbreak and the elation in like a 2-minute span. And one of the things I love also about this is the directorial work in the broadcast. So the announcer is fantastic. The commentating is brilliant on it, but also the choices of shots at just the right times really just adds to the whole thing. So I have it queued up. Let me get it brought in here, and we'll play this through.
I think there will be Leicester who will finish the stronger. Knockout, he's got beyond Briggs, still going. Knockout goes to ground as Cassetti leads on him. Penalty! That is a massive decision. What a huge decision given by Michael Oliver. I'll tell you what, I'm not completely sure about this. I'm with Gianfranco Zola. I feel that Knockout is looking for this penalty. There might be some contact on him, but he's looking to go to ground. We'll get a better view here. He does brilliantly to get into the penalty area. Once he knocks it past Cassetti, there's a slight touch. To me, he throws himself to the ground, and that is a massive call for the referee. I felt he was probably going to book Knockout, but he's given a penalty, a massive call, and I'm not convinced he's got it right. Knockout, for me, is looking for it.
That's worse than I remember.
It's a season-defining call, nothing short of that. If Knockout, who won it, scores it, Leicester City go to Wembley, and it's the end for Watford. Knockout takes, Almunia saves, Knockout follows in, Almunia saves again! Absolutely astonishing. Now here come Watford. Forestieri. Here's Hogg! Deeney! Do not scratch your eyes. You are really seeing the most extraordinary finish here. It almost mirrors the final day.
All right, we'll pause it there, but that is my all-time favorite sequence.
That's a good one.
I think in soccer.
I didn't consider that one, but that's a good one. That's just in terms of it's got, like you said, it's got everything you could want.
And I mean, heartbreak for Leicester City fans, certainly the way that
I'm sure they got over it.
But if you're a Watford fan, even though they eventually go on, if I remember correctly, to lose to Crystal Palace, and they don't get promoted, but to be in the stadium that match day and go from what seems like absolute despair of giving away a game-ending penalty kick, basically, and have your goalkeeper come up with 2 saves, which is massive on its own, but then to take it down the field and score, like I just can't imagine. I can't imagine, but to be there on that day, to say you were in the stands, just would have been amazing. That is by far to me the best 2-minute sequence of football that I can remember.
I think it would be hard to disagree with that. And I think part of what's super wild about that too is that was a League One playoff semifinal in 2013, and then less than 5 years later, both of those clubs are in the Premier League, and one of them has won the Premier League. It's kind of wild just to think how far they've come, or how far they went in those few years.
Yeah, it was, again, it's true to some respects, but you get all the people always talk about in terms of pro-rel, which I don't think is a pro-rel function, but talk about the same teams win all the time. And yes, you do have some teams that tend to stay dominant over quite a long time, but you also have a lot of movement. And then at the lower level, you get things like this that you just don't get in a closed league system. But I think those were mine.
Well, and that's a very good choice. Like I said, I didn't think of that one. And not, we've talked about the whole pro-rel thing in this show a lot, but I think something too that we didn't talk about last time is that, or maybe we did, that there's this kind of idea in American sports that the only thing that matters is winning a championship, anything else is a failure. And so I think that kind of plays into it as well.
Right. I would agree. And we've, as you said, had some of those conversations, and I'm sure we'll dive into that subject area in some future episodes. But for right now, let's jump into a couple of current events quickly. I don't know if you saw this last week. Last week we did our episode on Canadian soccer. Well, I think it was the day after our episode last week, the Canadian Premier League announced an expansion. So there's going to be a new team in Quebec. I think it's the first team in Quebec. They'll be in the Montreal area, but it's going to be FC Supra will be the 9th team, a new team in the Canadian Premier League. So
where will they be based? I'm guessing that's not the city.
Montreal.
Oh, okay. You said that. That's right.
Not sure. I have a link. We'll see if we can get it in the show notes here, but there's forget the stadium exactly, but the city or, the metropolitan area. I'm not sure if they're directly in Montreal or not, or in and around Montreal, but Montreal area. But nice to see that there is some expansion happening at the top. We'll see, after last week's discussion, whether the promotion relegation that's happening at the lower levels eventually works its way up and they do get a unified pyramid at some point. So we'll keep an eye on that over time. Also, in terms of the 2026 World Cup next year, in Outsports, I saw an article that Seattle is planning to host a Pride match they're hosting a series of group matches. So one of them is going to be a Pride match, and they're at least right now planning to do a bunch of things with the match specifically, but that match happens to fall on the day of their planned Pride parade. So they're going to be doing stuff all around the city anyway. And I think it'll be very interesting. if they're able to pull this off. I really hope they are. But in light of our environment and how, I'll say, fucked up our world is right now, especially in this country, and in light of, I don't know, our dictator in chief and our Department of War Crimes person. So, just all the stuff that happened today, we'll see how this plays out in a year. But good to see that they are planning to do. They're not backing down or shying away. They expressly said in the article that because of what's happened in previous World Cups, especially in Qatar, they want to show that in Seattle, like, everybody's welcome. I mean, that wasn't an exact quote out of the article, but that was certainly the gist of the message.
Well, good for Seattle. I hadn't seen that. Love that.
Yeah. So I hope that is able to play out. And the last little current event thing before we get into our Cup news and lower league news is, did you see it's only being floated right now? This is not a definite, but some of the federations from South America, from CONMEBOL, are floating the idea of a 64-team World Cup for the 2030 World Cup.
Yeah, I had seen that. Yeah. I don't know. Did you have a follow-up to that, or you want me to just kind of...
Yeah, jump in. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I did see that. And so on one hand, it would be the 100th anniversary of the first World Cup. So I get that. And I do think that the way they shoehorned it into like have a couple of games in South America so that they could then give 2034 or whatever it is to Saudi Arabia and just like call that good was pretty naked and blatant. So if it's already a little bit tarnished, so I don't mind that so much, especially if that means that like there can be some teams that just play their groups like down in South America. I guess that would be cool, especially if it was in Uruguay like the 100 years ago. I don't know though. It's just like I saw somebody made a funny like comment about it. It was like, why don't we just have everybody in the world compete in the World Cup? But what we'll do is when we get to the round of 32, we'll have it in a centralized location, and before that, it can be regionalized. And it's like, I mean, and the point being, like, at what point are we just like making it so everybody's qualified? I don't know. Like, obviously, 64 is
and
not
making
there.
Money.
Well, right, but. Yeah, so I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I think if it were a one-off, like just for the 100th World Cup, maybe.
And that's the argument. The argument is to make it a one-off.
Yeah, but it never will be a one-off, will it? Especially when they have so many more games to make so much more money.
If it's successful, no. They will try to have as many games as possible, to market as many games and make as much money as possible.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I feel for CONMEBOL because they got
shafted hard on that.
They are getting screwed out of World Cup cycles because in effect they got kind of given a little bit here, like we'll toss you a bone, but because they're going to host something in 2030, it means they got to sit out 2 more World Cup cycles before they can host again, and they're looking at these other groups that have hosted after them, confederations, hosted after them, like Qatar, and now it's going to be back in Saudi Arabia again, and CONMEBOL's like, okay, what about us? So I think this is a little bit of like, we know we're kind of getting screwed out of World Cup cycles here, that it's going to be maybe, 38 before we can host it. Actually, it won't be 38. It'll have to be 42. Because they'll have to, well, no, I guess it could be 38. Actually, God, I'm trying to think through this.
Well,
no, they'll have to miss 2 additional World Cup cycles, so it'll be 12 years later. 42 would be the earliest.
Well, but they don't have to miss 2 cycles though, but because they're doing 2 confederations in 2030, that means. Oh no, wait, 2. I guess that would be 2 cycles to go before going back to Asia. Never mind.
They're doing Africa, they're doing Europe, and they're doing South America. They're doing 3 confederations in 2030.
Just get them back to
Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. So yeah, it's obviously a mess. Certainly CONMEBOL would like, since they hosted the first one, would like more matches in South America. I see the frustration, and I don't know if floating 64 teams is a better idea, but I
they should just do another Mundialito instead. In what was it, 1980? They did. It was just the previous World Cup winners, a 6-team tournament at the time. I mean, I think that's a cool idea, and if they're gonna be, FIFA's gonna be big old wads about this, maybe it's time to. I don't know. Obviously, that wouldn't pan out because you'd require teams from other confederations to get on board with you. But I don't know. It's all going to shit anyway.
Yeah. So let's switch gears over to some lower league news, and I don't know if I have it in our notes for the rundown, but I'm going to jump into this first. Seen some chatter in the last couple of days about the USL Players Association and their unhappiness with USL as a league. So I'm just mentioning that, just throwing it out there. We'll have to keep an eye on this. I know there's been some stuff kind of tossed out there from the Players Association trying to encourage fans to block and not follow the league. So I don't know if we're leading into a very contentious thing where these are just some shots across the bow exploring, like, where do we sit with the public? Like, are people reacting in our favor or not? I mean, not unusual during growth, especially, to have some pushback between, we'll call it, workers and management. So I hope the USL can get through this, but I also, and this is going to be putting my union hat back on, I hope the USL Players Association, I hope they do a better job fighting for their members than I think the MLS Players Association has done in the past.
Yes, I would agree.
So I do, as much as we speak very highly on this show a lot about USL and what they're trying to do and bring pro-rel, like, you have to treat your workers right,
100%. And in the same vein that we've talked about that, and this is not me saying I've seen things to suggest this is coming, but this is more me just thinking logically. In the same way that territory rights will eventually have to go away if pro-rel is really going to take hold and work, I think, and not necessarily salary caps, but like the extremely restrictive nature of the player collective bargaining in the USL, and and that's not, again, I understand the need for like financial constraints to prevent clubs folding, but that's a different thing than restricting player salaries or how they can earn money or how it's allocated, right? Like the current CBA does. But I don't know how it'll look, but it is something I think that doesn't get talked about a lot that will be difficult to reconcile, is that the way we collectively bargain athletes in this country doesn't really square with promotion and relegation. It will kind of require a multi-tiered CBA sort of deal, I think, and
it's gonna need to be some rethinking.
Yeah. It'll take some creative thinking. So I don't even remember where I was going with this sentence when it started, but the point being, I foresee that becoming found it again. I foresee that being a big issue for the USL, and something that will come up again in the future.
Yeah, I agree. It will, and I don't think it's an insurmountable hurdle, because I've heard people also, the anti-pro-rel thought, say something. It'll never work because of collective bargaining agreements and things that we have in this country. I don't find that to be an insurmountable hurdle. I think these are all things that can be worked through, but it will be a challenge, certainly, because they're going to be breaking new ground on how to do a collective bargaining agreement, and the USLPA right now covers Championship and League One players on the men's side. Now, I am not 100% sure if the women have their own group or if they fall under USLPA. But at least on the men's side, I know League One and Championship fall under it. And if they're going to go have a tier 1, is it just going to be one collective bargaining agreement for all 3 tiers on the men's side, or including the women's side as well? Or is it going to break it up into separate ones? So those, and again, I'm sure those are all things to be worked out, but it sounds like there is, at least at the moment, a little bit of animosity, or some digging in as we get ready to come up for negotiations. And part of that, go ahead.
No. I was more just going to say, hopefully it's just posturing, but
I was going to say part of that is because of news like this. So I think I texted this to you between our shows, but USL has just announced a new professional soccer team coming to Riverside, California. So just up the road from us here. Mm-hmm. So, and I feel like we can't go a week. We can't go a show without some major USL news coming. So again, as we said, with this incredible growth and announcements of teams that are happening and new teams looking to come in, and some we've heard of before loosely, others, like to me, I haven't heard anything about USL Riverside. This is the first I've heard of it. But as we start getting new groups coming up as well, it's gonna have things shape up on the player side with that. But if we ignore the player conversation for a moment, what are your thoughts about USL Riverside, and why should Andrew Vasiliadis bring back the Loyal?
Well, that second one I think is pretty self-evident, so I'll just leave that for now. It's actually interesting. I was looking into it the other day because I have a coworker in Riverside who was telling me that her daughter had just started playing soccer. So I was like, oh, if this fruition, this would be a cool thing for you two to check out, because they're going to do a women's team and a men's team as well. And I looked into it a little bit, and it doesn't necessarily seem like there's a whole lot of concrete anything yet. So I would guess this is at best like a few years away, and at worst may fall into kind of a Milwaukee sort of situation where it's like, is it ever even really going to happen? That said, I think the Inland Empire is probably like the number one untapped soccer market in all of the United States. Like, there are so many people there. I think people forget that it's really its own metropolitan area, because a lot of people outside of California just lump it in with LA, right?
Well, I think to a lot of people, LA is Southern California.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But I don't think a lot of people realize that the Inland Empire on its own would be one of America's 10 largest metropolitan areas. And in that is a really rich soccer culture. And, not to like stereotype demographically, but there's a very strong like Latin influence in the area. And, people love soccer down in Southern California, and the Inland Empire is no exception to that. So I guess I'm a little surprised this is the first time it seems like someone's trying to do this, unless I'm misremembering something. I know there's the indoor soccer team in Ottawa or whichever it is, but
Ontario,
that's not Ottawa. You know what I meant. Ontario. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think if they can get it off the ground, I don't see any reason it wouldn't be successful. Well, actually, I can see one reason is they would need a very large parking lot, because there's no way to get around the Inland Empire without a car. So I don't know how that's going to work out, but I think it's a good idea. I'm glad they're doing it, and I hope it's successful. I hope they've got some good people behind it, because I think, like I said, it's probably one of the number one untapped markets in all of the country.
Yeah, I'm just happy to see more teams potentially popping up in our market here in Southern California. And I do think, I know I was kind of joking a little bit, and we texted about this a little bit, but man, if the Loyal was still around, even if some of these are League One teams, like starting to get a richer, and not that we don't have, as you alluded to, if you look at the amateur ranks for UPSL, we have some USL2 teams, but UPSL is probably our dominant amateur league in Southern California. And we have so many teams that are playing, and so many leagues, that in Southern California, I counted it up just on the men's side the other day, just because I was looking at something else, and I think we have close to 100 amateur teams playing in Southern California. And what's a little heartbreaking about that to me is if even those teams could just get organized a little better and just even regionally within Southern California do some better promotion relegation, I think it would help everybody involved. But we have a lot of teams from, coming down from San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara to Ventura and then LA, down to San Diego, and then over to Imperial County and up through the Coachella Valley. And then, as you said, the Inland Empire area, Riverside, San Bernardino. There are tremendous amount of teams through there and some good soccer being played. And it would be nice to see a little more organization happen within our region.
Yeah,
like we see in some of the other areas of the country.
Well, I was going to say, and it's, it's not as far-fetched as somebody might think it to be. All they would have to do is organize to the degree that, like, the Midwest, Premier League, I think they call it, or the Eastern Premier League, or the one in New England, or I can't remember what they called themselves, but
it's now the American Premier League.
Right.
But, it used to be the Eastern Premier League.
There's nothing professional about it in the literal sense, but like it's an incredibly well organized system and group of teams. That's all you need. The rest will take care of itself because people who care will be there.
Yes, and there's some great promotion relegation stories happening over there in the APSL and linking down to the leagues in Long Island or the Cosmopolitan Soccer League, in more around, I think. Actually, I shouldn't say, because I'm going to get myself in trouble if I start trying to act like I understand the New York area. But you do have the Cosmopolitan Soccer League, which I think has 3 tiers to it. And then the APSL sits above that among several other leagues. So, for example, if you're in the Cosmopolitan League and you win, you can move up into the APSL. So again, it only helps, especially those teams in those areas. And I think the APSL has just recently worked its way down to the Atlanta area to start a new kind of tier and league. So we'll see. We'll see how all that plays out. But always, and again, I'll use a phrase that they use on Morning Kick Around, this dotting the map. I like to see the more clubs and more structure happening around the country. It's only going to help all the groups over time. Speaking of the loyal, though,
real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was just going to say, as far as I can tell, and I'm just glancing at Wikipedia here, the American Premier Soccer League relegates out to regional leagues that include the Cosmopolitan Soccer League, like you said, the Garden State Soccer Leagues in New Jersey, the Long Island Soccer League, like you said.
Right.
And then that's the Metropolitan Conference. Then you've got the Mid-Atlantic Conference, which comprised of the Maryland Soccer League, the Northeast Conference, which is the New England Champions League. So it breaks down into kind of really the entire Acela corridor there, like the whole, what do they call it? It's like a mega metro or something. There's like a term for it, like mega. I don't want to say megalopolis.
I don't know the term.
I don't think that's right, but like people always want to start at the top, but like get this shit organized in Southern California, and we will have one of the best soccer leagues, like, in the Western Hemisphere already. So,
yeah, agreed. So, what I was going to say, and this was a little bit of a dig towards SDFC, or at least it was a dig that the San Jose Quakes did, and I'm only reading this because it ties into a couple of things that we're getting ready to start. But SDFC has had a very good season. They're right now, I think, if I didn't miss anything over the week, I think they're still sitting atop the West. They might be atop based on tiebreaker rules right now. I think they're tied with Vancouver on points at the point that we're recording this show. But they lost a key game against San Jose over the weekend. And San Jose put out a thing like San Diego should have stayed loyal. And part of that also got me thinking of, well, what if Andrew Vassiliadis, either revived the team or kept the team? That would be an interesting conversation moving forward. So
There you go.
You have it up there on the screen. So there was that piece, but this kind of ties in getting into our cup news as well, because the under-20 World Cup is happening in Chile right now, and there are 3 players from SDFC that are over there. Pedro Soma, Luca Bombino, and Duran Furry are all there at the under-20 World Cup. So one, we wish them luck. They had a huge victory, just yesterday, I guess it was 9-1 over New Caledonia. It would be nice. Duran Furry, I think, is sitting as the number 2 goalkeeper, so it'd be nice to see if he can get in and get some matches. I don't know if they're going to rotate, or maybe if they are assured to advance, maybe he'll get in the last group match. But I know Pedro Soma and Luca Bombino got playing time in the first match, so great for them. And I saw a couple people arguing, I think more tongue-in-cheek online, that maybe that's why they didn't win, SDFC and with the Quakes. But we have that going on for the under-20 World Cup. We also have, in terms of cup news, we have the final of the 2025 US Open Cup tomorrow night, Wednesday night, against Austin and Nashville. And we have a former Loyal player playing in that, CJ Fodry, who helped Austin advance with his goal in the semifinals. So there, we've both been struggling a little with the Open Cup since it just went to MLS teams, but I think I might have a bit of a storyline hook for me to tune in to see.
Is it likely Fodry he starts, or if anything, he'll come off the bench?
Well, again, I want to be careful what I say, because I am not following Austin at all. I just get what news I get that happens to come through the San Diego channels, specifically because of CJ Fodry. So I'm not the one to ask, but it seems like he's been getting a little more playing time, or did get a little more playing time coming in off the bench, especially with Brandon Vasquez being hurt. So I think he's been having the chance to get a little bit of time. Again, someone can feel free to correct me out there, but I don't believe he's been getting a lot of, maybe not any starting minutes, but has been coming in off the bench, I know, for some games.
Fair enough.
So we have that, and that is kind of leading us a little bit into our main story, is how do you qualify for the 2026 Open Cup? Because the winner of the 2025 US Open Cup, I think I said the wrong thing there, but the winner of the 2025 US Open Cup will get an automatic berth into the 2026 Concacaf Champions Cup. That's what I meant to say there. So there's a Champions Cup berth on the line tomorrow night with the Open Cup, as well as I think the Canadian Championship is also tomorrow night. I think.
Really? That was a quick.
The final game. Yeah, I think they're both tomorrow night, and the winner of that for Canada will also get an automatic berth into the 2026 Concacaf Champions Cup. But before we start diving, before we start diving into our Concacaf Champions Cup, just a quick note that if you do want to watch the 2025 US Open Cup final, it is tomorrow night. It will be live on the Golazo Network. They're doing, from what I've heard, an hour-long pregame show. I think JT Baston and Pochettino are supposed to be on there as guests as well, so be interesting to possibly hear some of their take. It'll be interesting, and I don't watch Apple TV very much, or the MLS broadcasts, but I think it'll be interesting to see a different network presenting this and the Open Cup and see what direction they take, since this is not an MLS broadcast.
You talk about Mauricio Pochettino being on a pregame show for the US Open Cup final. That would literally, I would not believe you if you told me that a year ago, like when ESPN had it or whomever. But it just goes to show how much of a difference it can make when you have like a network that actually gives a shit broadcasting it. And I unironically think the U.S. national team coach, U.S. men's national team coach, talking about the U.S. Open Cup final will draw more eyes to it. You know, maybe not a lot, but it's something. I don't know. I've really appreciated. We've talked about this before. In general, CBS's and Golazo Network's kind of general approach to coverage of the game in America, but especially how they don't just focus on MLS. They'll talk about other things. It's so refreshing.
Yes. Agreed. And one last thing, just to squeeze in terms of the Open Cup, they revealed, I think today, the new John Mata Trophy, which is the trophy that goes to the amateur team that goes the furthest in the U.S. Open Cup. So they've already done the first one, which is El Farolito, because they created this kind of midstream. Sure. And El Farolito was the team that made it the furthest along. So from here on forward, and El Farolito will be the first one to benefit from this, not only do you get the $50,000 for being the amateur team that makes it the furthest in the tournament, you also get the John Mata Trophy. So you get a trophy in your trophy cabinet. And you get an automatic berth into the following year's U.S. Open Cup.
Nice.
Which is a new official thing that has started in this transition between 25 and 26. So El Farolito is one of our first teams to qualify for the 2026 U.S. Open Cup. And they didn't know it. Right?
Yeah, right.
They went as far as they did in the tournament, but now all the amateur teams have an additional thing to play for because it's highly unlikely they're going to make it to a final. But they do have something to kind of see if they can last the longest. Not only do they get the prize money, they now get a trophy and an automatic berth into the next cycle for the Open Cup, which I think is great. I hope they continue.
Yeah. See, I didn't know that. I like that for a lot of reasons, you know, probably the paramount of which is it makes a lot of sense, right? Merit-based, you know, admission to the cup. But also to me, the idea of like expanding who qualifies for the cup, like making the non-winning the tournament aspects of it necessarily more meaningful, signals to me that whoever is currently the custodian of the U.S. Open Cup, and I recognize that's a more complicated question than it probably needs to be, actually cares about it. And that is a change from the last few years, and it feels good.
Yes. I agree, and I think it gives an additional incentive for some of these amateur teams who know, you know, they're not likely going to go very deep in the tournament. So they might get an upset here or there, but it definitely gives them a little more to play for, and just giving them each a little more to play for can make all those games in the first rounds a little more competitive, especially when they're facing a team that's above them in, well, I'll say the pyramid, and I use that loosely, but a team that's above them in the pyramid.
Yeah, 100%. We all love an underdog story, so giving them even more reason to go for it, I think, is always a good thing.
All right, let's jump into our talk about the Concacaf Champions Cup, again, specifically the 2026 Concacaf Champions Cup, and how teams qualify for this year. Now, the Champions Cup, in some form or another, has been around since, I think, 1962, shortly after CONCACAF as a confederation was created by the merging of the North American Federation and the Central American, the Caribbean, you know, all those confederations coming together to form CONCACAF. And then they very quickly started the Champions Cup, which is what it was in the beginning. And it was just taking your winners of your different zones, really. And we're not going to go like a deep dive in the history of the Champions Cup here, but you know, you take your North American, your Central American champion, your Caribbean champion, and have them play. It was a true Champions Cup. But like the nature of all tournaments, over time, it expands, right? It expands to give more teams opportunity, rather than just have a couple of teams play, because what we've seen historically, when it's just a couple of teams playing, it's not as interesting to as many people. So the more teams you can involve in the process, the more interesting and more weight the tournament has. So CONCACAF did a Champions League format for a while, which a lot of people probably remember. I believe that started in 2008. And now they've reverted back to this Champions Cup and basically a knockout format. As soon as you show up, it's two-legged knockout series all the way through. And that's where we sit now, which was just changed into its most recent format, I think just a couple of years ago. It hasn't been very long that we're in this current format here.
Correct. It was the 2024 Champions season was the first cup.
Yeah. So like a lot of things, pandemic messes things up. People rethink, how we might want to try things. A lot of times here in CONCACAF, we try to emulate what's happening in Europe. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't work. Because we had a Champions League and we had, what would they call it? I don't know. But the same kind of structure where we had the league, I guess they called it, which they don't have anymore. Now they just have these ways to qualify for the Champions Cup. And we're diving into this because our local team, San Diego FC and MLS, has a chance, depending how they do over these next few weeks, to qualify for the CONCACAF Champions League, which means we will have games. At least one leg of the first series will be here in San Diego, which, obviously we've never had because we've never had anybody qualify from here, at least to my knowledge. I didn't go back and look historically, like way, way back when, but to my knowledge, we've had no one from this region here, San Diego, on the U.S. side of the border here, qualify for CONCACAF Champions Cup in any iteration.
No, I don't. Not that I'm aware of, I don't think.
Yeah. So here's how it stands right now. 27 teams qualify for the tournament, which feels like a really odd number besides being an actual odd number. But, 27 doesn't easily work out into nice groups of things. So, and it does work out in a way, which is one of the things I like about all these various tournaments and some of these investigations we're doing and looking deeply. You see like how people can take almost any grouping and number of teams, and if you mix and match things right, you can work still a good tournament out of it. So CONCACAF is divided into 3 zones because of the 3 original confederations that came together. There's a North American zone of Canada, US, and Mexico. There's the Central American zone, south of Mexico, so Belize, Guatemala, then all the way down to Panama. And then you have the Caribbean zone, all the other islands, and then the few countries there on the northern tip of South America. And there's tournaments, well, for the Central American and Caribbean zone, there are specific tournaments, and then you get qualifications out of that. But in North America, it's slightly different. So in North America, there are 18 teams that qualify. So out of Canada, Mexico, and the US, in some combination, there's going to be 18 teams.
I assume those are not evenly distributed.
Not evenly distributed. We'll go through the distribution in just a second. You get 6 from Central America. So Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, see if I can do them all, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. Did I miss somebody in there?
So each of those are guaranteed a spot? Each of those nations? Or is it like...
No, they have a tournament, and we'll go through that quickly as well.
Okay. Gotcha. That's right.
They do also do theirs proportionally. So Belize does not get the same amount.
I was going to say
berths in their qualifying tournament as other countries do.
As somebody who
Costa Rica.
Yeah, as somebody who spent a summer in Belize once and has a very soft spot for that country, I was going to say there's not a chance their national league is on the level of most of those other Central American leagues. So
correct.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and then you get 3 from the Caribbean zone. So of those 27 teams, 5 teams get a bye into the round of 16. And they are, which I like the way CONCACAF does this now in this version, because you have qualification in each of the zones. And if you win your zone tournament, although technically North America doesn't have its own zone tournament. We'll talk about how it's split up. But at least if you are the Caribbean champion or you are the Central American champion, you get a bye into that round of 16. Even though there's 18 teams from the North American zone that make it in, you get a bye for that first round, which I like that they do this. They don't weight that part exclusively to the North American zone.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
Caribbean Cup gets a bye. The Central American Cup gets a bye. The Leagues Cup champ gets a bye, which I personally hate because it's kind of a manufactured tournament.
Not a fan of that.
And it technically includes Canadian teams, but only the ones that are part of MLS. And again, closed league, you can't get any other teams possibly ever make it in there. And frankly, Mexico, at least at the moment, is closed. So I don't like that the Leagues Cup gets, actually they get more than one spot, but I don't like that they get even a bye through there. You get your Liga MX champ, which is determined by, well, if you have the same team win the Apertura and the Clausura, then it's easy, right? It's the same team. But if you have split teams, then you look at their aggregate scores across both leagues, in the fall and the spring, and whoever has the highest aggregate points is the one that gets the bye. The other one still gets in, but that's the one that gets the bye. And then the MLS Cup champion. So those are your 5 teams that make it through with a bye. And then the remaining ones are split up, like we said, 3 for the Caribbean. So the other 2 in the Caribbean would be the runner-up for their cup and then the third place winner. So basically the top 3 teams in their cup competition. They all make it through. In the Central American group, well, all 4 of your semifinalists make it in. One of those is obviously your champion. So your champion makes it in, and the other 3 semifinalists make it in as one of those extra spots. And then what I find very interesting, and this is actually going on right now, the second legs of the quarterfinals for the Central American tournament are happening this week. There's a match tonight. There's one on Wednesday. There's one on Thursday. There's one on Friday. The winners obviously all move on to semifinals like we normally do in a tournament. But all the losers, they pair them up for 2 games and they play each other. Or that's not right. But you get the losers for the different games, and they actually do a play-in to get your last 2 spots. So if you lose a quarterfinal match, you still have a chance of being one of the 2 play-in qualifiers, almost like a double elimination little portion of a tournament if you get knocked out at the quarterfinals. And then Canada, they do their Canadian Premier League Shield winners, and then their Cup winners at the end of the season, because they do a playoff thing at the end like we do. And then the Canadian Cup champion. So whoever wins tomorrow night for the Canadian Cup, which is the equivalent of our Open Cup, they will get a berth in the Concacaf Champions Cup. Now, Canada, like the US, has a closed league up top. So the only way a team outside of the Canadian Premier League can get in is if they win the Canadian Cup champions, or they win the cup, they win the final.
So it's not unlike a USL team. The only way is the USL Cup.
Exactly the same, yeah. So it is possible that, we do have a lower league team that's playing in the Canadian Cup tomorrow night. They're playing Vancouver.
I realized it was a Vancouver derby. I didn't catch.
Yeah, it is
I'm
a
bad
Vancouver
at
derby.
The logos. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
I'll be rooting for Vancouver.
Yeah. So that's Canada. And then the United States gets, now this is not really the United States because you have to oh no, I guess it is the United States because they do split it up for Canada. I forget. I think. Actually, now I'm not sure about this. So let's go through this here quickly. You get the Open Cup winner that comes in for the or whoever wins the Open Cup, so we have the final tomorrow night, they will come in as an automatic berth for the Concacaf Champions Cup. You get 4 that come out of MLS. You get the MLS Cup winner, and you basically get your 2 conference winners. Now, one of your conference winners is going to be your Supporter Shield winner. The other conference winner, obviously, is not your Supporter Shield winner, but they won the conference, and since they do an unbalanced schedule in MLS, you get each of those conference winners that make it in. And here's where San Diego potentially could get into the CONCACAF Champions Cup, because I don't know what the score was tonight, but I think if Chicago beat Miami tonight, I think Philly automatically gets the Supporter Shield in MLS. So one of San Diego FC's pathways is to win the Western Conference. If they do that, they would get a berth in, or whoever wins the Western Conference would get a berth into the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And then it's the next 2 best point earners for the Shield, right? So if what it looks like the Shield winner is going to be in the East, probably Philadelphia, and it looks like you might get 2 people in the East that also have higher points than whoever wins the Western Conference. It looks like 3 teams might come out of the East and 1 team out of the West for CONCACAF Champions Cup. So these next few games for SDFC are critical for them to get a chance to play in an international, well, I guess you could say the Leagues Cup is an international competition, but, to play in our Confederation tournament as one of your champions. So that is one of their pathways. And then the Leagues Cup, we already said the winner gets there, and then the runner-up and the 3rd place person get in. So we already know the Leagues Cup results, and they're all MLS teams. They're all U.S. teams specifically. Or actually, is that right? God, now I just blanked out on who the teams are. The Galaxy, I think, came in 3rd place. I'm trying to remember who made it to the finals of the Leagues Cup, because I don't follow it. But we already have those decided. Those 3 teams are already there. I imagine, Dylan, you're probably looking it up, right?
I had it up. Sorry.
That's fine.
Else just then.
And then for Mexico, they have 5 teams that make it automatically. 6 that make it automatically from Mexico. So already their winner. And then if we have a different Apertura and Clausura champion, then the other one gets one of the berths. And then they start, the runners up get a berth, and then it's the 2 next best on aggregate points over the Apertura and Clausura seasons. So you already know all 5 teams from Mexico. And since Mexico didn't get any berths out of the League Cup, we know they're 6 and they're set. So they have, let's see who's in there. Toluca, America, Monterrey, Cruz Azul, Tigres, and Pumas are the 6 teams that will be in the 2026 Champions Cup for CONCACAF. U.S. still waiting to see what happens here at the end of the season. So your cup winner for MLS Cup, your conference winners, your next 2 runners-up in terms of total points, and your U.S. Open Cup champions. So the MLS could, I think if I did my math right here, have 9 total teams in the CONCACAF Champions Cup next year. And then Canada, we're waiting for their 3 teams. One of them will be decided tomorrow night with their Canadian Cup, and then they just have a couple more weeks here left in their season. I forget how many exactly, maybe 3. But then we'll figure out who their Shield winners are, and then they'll have their playoffs for determining their Cup champion. And pretty soon, we'll know all the North American teams. As we mentioned earlier, the Central American teams are doing their tournament, and they're doing their second leg of their quarterfinal matches this week. So we'll know who those winners are, and all the winners will get one of those berths, and then the losers will play for a play-in spot, two play-in spots. And the Caribbean tournament should happen somewhere around our winter time, December, I think it is, because I think the tournament proper, I think, starts in January. All right, so that was a lot of kind of background of who gets in and where and how many teams. Dylan, I know you got kicked out there for a brief bit before you came back in, but how many comments, questions, or?
No, I mean, I think, though I obviously hold this tournament way above the Leagues Cup because it is merit-based, I do have some similar frustrations in that it does feel a little bit unfairly slanted towards the United States, which I don't know that the U.S. has necessarily earned.
The U.S. and Mexico both, but
which I would argue Mexico has earned, though, on a sporting merit, like in the history of CONCACAF kind of level, right? They are the dominant football association in CONCACAF historically. So I mean, I think you could make the argument they deserve the most teams, whereas I think MLS gets it because of the money, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Leagues Cup was a huge swing in that, right? The MLS gets 3 teams out of the Leagues Cup to qualify, and Liga MX got 0 of that for this year. But I agree with it. I do not like the Leagues Cup at all. If, like the other zones, are going to do a tournament to get in, I think it's great. Then why don't we do a slightly wider North American zone tournament to figure out who these berths are going to go to? And I'm pretty sure I'm cynically going to say I know why, and it's because if we do that, that's another potential revenue stream that MLS doesn't have control of, and they don't like participating or being part of tournaments and things. They don't control the revenue stream. I mean, Don Garber has been very open about that in his comments and what they say, and it's one of their biggest hangups with the U.S. Open Cup. And that's one of those things that frustrates me consistently about the league, MLS as a league, and that, well, what's in it for me? If there's not anything in it for me, or I can't derive more value directly to me out of it, then I don't want to participate in it. And that's a big problem I have with, MLS as a league, and specifically the Board of Governors and those decisions that they make along those routes. Because I think if you'd ask a bunch of people who work for the teams, they'd like to see it a different way.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just American sports business, isn't it? Really, when you get down to it, that's just how we do it here. So,
yeah, unfortunately. And I think, just like in Canada, well, I mean, I guess on the one hand, for us, at least there is an avenue for lower league teams to get a shot at a Champions Cup berth. And that's through the Open Cup. If you're in Mexico, you don't. You have to be in Liga MX to get any of the berths. There's
Canada,
no option anywhere else.
Does Mexico not have a national cup? I guess I've never really thought about that before.
Yeah, I do not believe they do. And
well, that's a shame.
I mean, that's something to look into, because I'm not really, I feel like I don't ever remember there being a national.
I mean, surely if there was, Mexico, it would be listed as like giving a birth to this tournament, right?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. That's good. We should do a little looking into that, or maybe one of our listeners can help us out. Might have to do a little historical dive on if Mexico has ever had a national cup, especially one that's been open to all teams in Mexico.
Yeah, no, that's kind of surprising. You'd think a country with such a rich football culture would just obviously have something like that, but maybe not.
Yeah. But anyway, I like that the Caribbean zone, Central American zone now, I mean, this hasn't always been the case. This is part of this new format for the Champions Cup and how teams qualify from these different zones. But I like that they have, the Central American teams have those club teams from those 7 countries have this tournament and they get to play. And they do, you had asked earlier, like, how are the allocations? So within the country leagues, you have to be, well, each country decides, just like, MLS gets to pick who from MLS. If MLS gets 4 berths, then MLS gets to decide how those berths get distributed. So each of the countries in Central America get to decide, but most of them get 3. Belize, I think, gets 2. Someone else, I think, gets 2. Nicaragua, maybe. I think the 2 of them both get 2. Everybody else gets 3. That's 18. And then they have 2 berths get distributed based on how people finished last time. So for this particular tournament, there was a team from Costa Rica for 2025. There was a team from from 2024. There was a team from Costa Rica and a team from Nicaragua that made it to the finals. So in this version of the tournament in 2025, Costa Rica and Nicaragua each got an extra berth. So Costa Rica ended up with 4 teams for this year's tournament, and Nicaragua ended up with 3 instead of the 2 they would normally be allocated.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there is some split there. And then they just, like, I think because they have 20 teams, they do 4 groups of 5 teams. And then the top 2 teams advance out.
Fair enough. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I know football in Central America, well, and the Caribbean too, I guess, is pretty varied and disparate. So, you're going to get some kind of centralized success regions, if you will, versus some countries like, again, Belize, that I wouldn't be shocked to see them never have a team really get involved in this. So anyway.
Yeah. And they, I just did a quick cursory glance because I wasn't sure where everybody stood right now. And I think only Nicaragua and Belize have a top division, but no relegation out of that top division. I don't know what the whole football structure looks like. That's something I've never really looked into directly. But all of the other 5 countries in Central America all have relegation out of their first division, at least. So there's some promotion relegation happening in all those countries, for the different varied teams. And we know from prior CONCACAF Champions Cups that there are some strong Central American teams that play in the tournament. And they're usually not quite as strong, but there can be some strong Caribbean teams that can, at least make a decent run for a little bit in there.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back through the historic winners, obviously the last 2 decades have been
Mexico dominates.
Right. But you do see a lot of Costa Rican teams and a couple other countries in there. My favorite that I found going back was Transvaal from Suriname, which is actually geographically in South America, but those 3 little countries there playing CONCACAF for whatever reason. But yeah, historically, like Alajuelense, boy, that is tough for a white guy to say. From Costa Rica are historically pretty successful, although you don't see them go deep recently. But I feel like they've popped up a couple times in the recent years. So.
Yeah, and it'll be good, and also good experience for any American teams, whether they're
100%.
MLS or anything else, to go down to some of these. I think we would consider them harsh environments.
100%.
But I think they're great growing experiences to play in something that's. I think even in MLS and even with the raucous nature of supporter groups and fandom, you do not get the, I'll call it, intimidating atmosphere that you might get in some of these other places. And just the passionate fans, right? And
yeah.
Now,
fundamentally speaking, the you're never going to get those atmospheres in America, because even if you're charging like $30 for tickets, the people you're icing out there are the ones whose like entire week or month, year lives and dies with how this team does, right? Those are the people that go nuts, and those are the kind of fan bases that have better access to these teams in countries like that. And so you do get just way better atmospheres that, like you said, maybe with one or two exceptions, you don't find in MLS.
Yeah, and I agree. I think a lot of that has to do with ticket pricing. I think in this country, at all kinds of levels, we price your most diehard fans out.
Yes.
The ones who would be there to help create the atmosphere. And I think there's too many ownership groups that cater to the more casual fan. People who are willing to spend a little more and come 3 or 4 times, maybe a whole season, than the ones who are there all the time. Frankly, I think some of the ownership groups would rather deal with those people than deal with diehard supporters.
Because season tickets get you a theoretical discount per game, which they don't like. Season ticket members expect perks and shit, which they don't like. Like, yeah, they absolutely are trying to cater more towards your casual fan. I mean, I don't even think they try to hide it, right? NFL is always talking about like how they need to play games in Sao Paulo and Dublin because they've maxed out their expansion fan wise in America. It's like, cool. Anyway.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for us in our topic this week of the 2026 Concacaf Champions Cup, specifically the qualifying phase. So, Dylan, as we look ahead to the week that's coming up, do you have any particular soccer plans?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the return of the European competitions. I've been trying to keep an eye on some of the more fun fixtures. I had Kairat Almaty versus Real Madrid on today. I actually thought Kairat had a pretty good
as well.
I thought they had a good account of themselves in the first half. That young 18-year-old goalkeeper of theirs, I think, has a bright future. That said, the 5-0 scoreline I think is about more, what I expected. I'll probably tune into the Open Cup final, especially if CJ Fodry is in the lineup. But then I think this weekend is the Jägermeister Cup final, right? Or am I thinking of...
Oh my goodness, I didn't even look at. I forgot.
No, I think I'm wrong about that. My mistake.
Okay.
So
actually, it might be.
Hold on, let me pull it up.
I feel like the 4th sticks in my mind.
Yes, it is. It's Saturday. Oh shit!
Okay.
Nice. It's at 5:00. I have a comedy show I'm going to at 9:30 that I'm very excited about. So this is actually
okay.
Yeah. Nice. Right. Yeah. So I'll be watching that on Saturday then.
Yeah, I will probably check that out as well. And I don't, I'll pick things up as I can as I get a chance. But I'm really looking forward to, if you're still up for it, to not this Sunday, but next Sunday, October 12th, for round 2 of the Open Cup qualifiers.
Yes, I know. I never responded to you because I wasn't sure if I was going to be available that weekend, but I am. It's the following weekend that I'll be out of town. So, yes, I definitely, let's do that. I think Logan Memorial makes more sense for both of us transport wise.
Yeah, so let's plan on doing that. We'll see if we can get some people out there as well and get a little crowd and have some fun. But if also there's another game, so if you can't make that one and you are here in San Diego and want to help support lower league soccer, right? Support local soccer. If you want to support local soccer and check out one of these qualifying rounds, there is another game that Sunday. It's at 6 p.m. And I got to check here at Aviera Community Park, and that's going to be City SC versus Rebels SC. And I would imagine that the winner of that match is going to play the winner of the match that we're going to, which is FC Balboa and San Diego Inter. So I imagine we have a little bit of some San Diego derbies happening here to figure out who our winner is from San Diego, and whoever that is, as we said before on the show, with the way they've set up the rounds, I imagine they're going to have one additional match against another team from Southern California before we determine who is coming out of our region here to get one of those automatic qualifying berths.
Yeah, I'm excited to go watch some local soccer. I haven't really done enough of that recently.
Yeah, I haven't either, and didn't get out over the summer, so that's going to be one of my goals coming up, and definitely next summer I'll try to get out to see some more local soccer here. So anyway, thank you for joining us. This wraps up another episode of the LGS Pod. If you have any questions or comments about tonight's episode, if you have suggestions, especially for some historical deep dives you might want us to do, please drop us a note. You can leave us a note here on our YouTube channel in the comments. You can send us a message on Blue Sky at soccershorts@bigpinedigital.com. If you're listening to the podcast on your podcasting app, you can send us a text using the send us a text link, should be at the very top of the episode description. We always welcome your comments, your feedback, and your suggestions for show ideas. But always, if you can make it and you are available at 6 o'clock on Tuesday nights, is usually when we record live on our YouTube channel, come join us, hang out, and participate in the chat. All right, Dylan, do you have any final comments before we head on out?
Yeah, actually, I didn't realize, but the second leg of a quarterfinal match in the Central American Cup is actually going on right now. FC Motagua of Honduras is hosting Alajuelense, two-time champions from Costa Rica. Tied 1-1 on the night, but Motagua up 2-1 on aggregate in the 35th minute. So somebody wants to tune into that. I'm sure that's going to be a great game with a great atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm going to see. It's one of those, if I don't get a chance tonight, like I said, there's another game on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So each of the quarterfinals are on a different night this week. So might be worth checking out, or even adding it to your FOTMob app so you can keep track of what's going on and who might be an opponent if SDFC actually makes it all the way through to the Champions Cup.
I also want to say real quick, a blast from the past I was not expecting. The goal scorer for Alajuelense tonight is none other than Joel Campbell, formerly of Arsenal. So wow. Good for him. Anyway, I hadn't heard that name in like a decade. So
I haven't heard that name in a while. Agreed. All right. Well, everyone get out, enjoy your soccer for the week, and make plans to join up with us in a couple weeks to see an Open Cup preliminary match. But otherwise, we'll see everyone next week. Good night, everyone.